So our next speaker is Susan Powell, and she comes to us from UC Berkeley. She's the GIS and map librarian there, and she is going to be presenting maps captured from the German military during World War II.
All right. Oops. That was a preview of what's to come. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you all today. Again, my name is Susan Powell. I'm the GIS and Maps librarian at UC Berkeley, and I'm going to be talking today about a German World War II captured maps collection that we've been working on analyzing, upgrading the cataloging, and digitizing. And my colleague Heiko Muir is also here with us on the call this morning, and he and I have just written a paper that's also been submitted for peer review, which we're excited about. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that. So just a quick overview of the collection that we're talking about. So the Army Map Service distributed maps following World War II. So we heard from Julie Sweekind-Singer earlier this morning about the map, some about that distribution program where they were distributing maps that the Army Map Service was creating. They also distributed maps that had been captured from enemy militaries during the end of World War II and following the close of World War II. So we believe there are about 35 libraries that received those captured maps. So a much smaller number than were receiving maps from through the normal depository program. And largely those maps have been somewhat understudied and unanalyzed in library collections around the US historically for a number of reasons. In part because of the language barriers, they're a little bit harder to understand than the AMS maps. And there may have been some fear that the maps would kind of be put together and demanded back. So there was some anxiety about that. But UC Berkeley received maps through this program, and about 21,000 probably is what we estimate in the collection. But because of that kind of integration with other maps in the collection, we haven't been exactly sure which maps were received through that depository program. So in late 2017, the UC Berkeley Library began a project to analyze and identify the maps that were in our collection from the Captured Maps program. And that was in part spurred on by a donation from UC Riverside, where their library was going through a renovation and needed to downsize their physical map collection. And the librarian there, Janet Reyes, offered those maps to the Berkeley collection, and we started integrating them. So as of March 2020, which as we all know is kind of like the great shutdown, we had analyzed and cataloged and scanned about 10,000 maps of that collection. And so we're about halfway through. Just quickly, the amount of overlap that we've seen with the Riverside collection so far has been about 92%, but that varies widely. So there's some sets that Riverside has that we don't have at all, and vice versa. So we created a map website guide to help give access to some of to the maps that we've scanned. And I encourage you to go and explore it. The map series range in size from just a few maps to several thousand. So accessing them, indexes are helpful for that. And we've also put together a small reading list to help orient users to the maps and talked about kind of the process behind the collection. And I should say the geography scope ranges is mostly Europe, but also includes some pieces of North Africa and Central Asia. And the scale ranges from 1 to 25,000 all the way up to 1 to 1 million into the much smaller scales. So this access this kind of website is an access point to the actual map scans, and the map scans appear in the Berkeley Library digital collection site. And those, again, we kind of encourage you to explore through the interactive map viewer. You can zoom way in on the maps and get really nice detail. All of the maps are also available for download through the website. So you can download them and explore them on your own devices. And I wanted to, oh yeah, this is some more information about what appears on the library digital collection site page. So the part of the project was really taking a good look at the cataloging records, the way that we had described these maps in our catalogs. All of the maps in Berkeley's collection were cataloged, but they also hadn't been extensively cataloged. So the minimal, I'd say minimal records. And HICO has done a lot of work to add lots of additional information about source materials, the different bodies, corporate bodies that were involved in the making of the maps. Because it really was, I think this got mentioned in the breakout room earlier, but the German kind of state of mapping at the beginning of their war of aggression. Sorry, there's a parade of motorcycles going by my house right now, so you might hear some background noise. Yeah, it was a kind of a federalist state, and so the mapping program was also not centralized. And you can see the change in the mapping style of the German military throughout the course of the war. So I wanted to end with really focusing in on one map in particular. This is an example from a set of France that covers France at 1 to 25,000. And this sheet in particular is up near the coast in Brittany and was produced in 1943. So if we zoom in a little bit, we can see some interesting things about this map. And I will say not all of the maps in the collection are quite this interesting, but there are, when you have 20,000 maps, you're bound to get some interesting ones. So these were used in the field, and this map has hand annotations with cultural landmarks like churches, chapels, stone crosses, and the TP references that you see are referring to trigonometric points. So this map was updated by the German military, and then as the course of the war continued, they needed increased information and increased accuracy. So they were continuing to upgrade the maps. The other interesting thing about this is that you'll see there are two really distinct styles of mapping that we're seeing on this one map. The kind of cleaner looking, more modern version at the top of the map is the updated German mapping that had ground checks and had aerial photography to check and ground truth the older mapping that it was based on. So it was based on older maps that the French had produced, and then the Germans had updated it, but you can see they hadn't quite gotten to update all it. So this little inset diagram is printed in the margin of the map, and it shows when the aerial photography was taken and flown that is the basis for the updated mapping that we see on the other portions of the map. And this was, this was published as a new edition under the Deutsche Heereskarte, which is the series, that kind of designation that began to be used around 1942. And it meant that the Germans had kind of updated the mapping information enough that they were comfortable with it as a kind of uniform set. And the older portion of this map hasn't been updated yet. So the newer version you could use for directing artillery fire, for really kind of accurate military operations, whereas the portion that we see in the bottom left is really could be used for locating certain things, but it's not accurate enough for military operations. But they were so in need of accurate information for what they had that they went ahead and published the sheet. So I want to encourage you to explore more. As I said, we have about 10,000 maps that have been scanned and uploaded so far. And once we're able to get back into the office, we'll be working on getting the rest of the collection in there. And these are just a few of our some favorite snapshots from the maps. But
thank you.
I think that's
We have one question. Ed Franco is asking, were there any propaganda maps promoting Nazi ideology? What about mapping the Holocaust?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there definitely were those produced. I think the maps that we see in the Berkeley collection and in the captured maps collection in general were more used by the military for operations and planning and less about the ideological persuasion. But and I'm not an expert on that area, but I know that the Germans were actively producing kind of the more ideological maps as well. Absolutely. And the most of what we have is also these topographic maps, but they were producing other kinds of maps that were of use kind of in planning. So you see some resource inventories, there's census maps. So there are ones that are kind of informing the war effort in different ways than just on the ground troop information.
Great, thank you so much, Susan. That's wonderful.